Hello.
Hey, hey.
Hey, what's going on? Anything new today? Or
No, I mean, I haven't lost power, so doing good.
that's good. Do you have what was the story? It was just like an unexpected blackout, or what happened?
Yeah, it was nothing too serious. It cleared up by the end of the day, but just cosmically unlucky, I suppose.
I mean, yeah, I don't know where you're at geographically, but like I'm in Southern California. We do have those sometimes in the summer when everybody's like running their air conditioning at the same time. We do we end up getting
hmm
blackouts, but
Oh yeah, okay.
um. So okay, here we are, gonna finish up our Jangles video review. Do you want to introduce yourself or plug yourself or anything before we get started?
What's up, guys? I'm Flowtrace. You can check me out at twitch.tv/Flowtrace, and you can catch me on Prime K panels, Wick panels, Twitch politics space in general.
Cool, cool. Do you still have the link that
Yeah,
Okay, cool. I think we were at I want to say we were at 29 minutes if I remember correctly last
I
time.
think it was something right around there. I'll know it better based off the chapter. Pull this up.
This was a video where Jangles was talking about the advantages of debate as a mode of public discourse as compared to other things like video essays, for example.
See, I believe we were sorry about this. Conflict, type debates me,
I remember making a
compromises
mental
weakness.
note of it
So
last
yeah,
time, and it was,
I think
yeah, right around there. Okay.
What makes someone a grifter? What's the line? Usually, people use the term to refer to someone saying something they don't believe, or advocating publicly against things they do in private. But what about letting your audience dictate not what you believe, but how you talk about it? What if you wanted to have a discussion on the issue with a problematic figure on the other side, to genuinely see if they would temper their rhetoric, to reduce harm through understanding, even just a little bit, but your audience wanted blood? That this debate wasn't about the issue, but about holding them accountable for every transgression they've ever made, every harm they've caused, every person they've hurt. How does tax policy, or historical accuracy, or scientific consensus measure up to making them
Do
pay
you
for
want to
what they've
pause
done?
here?
Making a video or
mhm.
So what it sounds like what he's talking about is when when something else is going on that isn't actually a debate, but people kind of present it as a debate, right? Something occurs under
Yeah.
the pretense of debate, but it turns out to be something totally different.
I think there's also he's sort of getting at a very interesting concept, which is, you know, when we talk about grifting, we're typically talking about changing what you say to get an audience, right, for some sort of financial benefit. And he's sort of bringing the interesting point. What about changing how you say a thing for that? I- is that a compromise you should be willing to accept? Which is interesting, although I do think there is this. It's not nearly the problem that I think actual grifting is. I think grifting is, an interesting thing to think about and maybe to talk about, but I don't think it's something that's ever worthy of sort of going into in like the middle of a debate because this problem is it's one of those like well poisoners that sort of just unravels this massive can of worms. Where if you start accusing someone of being a grifter, well, the conversation is just going to be about this now for the next hour and relitigating every single thing that they've said. Like I think there have been a couple of Destiny debates that have done this, where someone said, you're not even a real person on the left, and Destiny's like, wait a minute, I'm not going to let you get away with that, and then forget whatever they're talking about. They're now going to be talking about, every time Destiny's had a controversial take or something like that, and it's just not very useful. I think you should just be looking to dismantle the arguments, regardless of whether or not the person really believes in them.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is especially true when you're talking to the person who you're accusing of being a grifter, but I
Yeah.
think to a lesser extent it can even happen when you're just talking about someone, right? So like if we were to have a conversation on here and say like such and such person is a grifter, like well, if we were to ever meet that person or any of their friends in the future, and then that might come up, it's
Yeah.
like you're it's weird because it's like, um, so in a way, like if I even thought that, I wouldn't necessarily think that I shouldn't say it, but like the thing you were saying earlier, I think I might say it differently because of that, right? Like I think
Yeah,
I do think I would feel compelled to present that information in a different way than if it were in a private context. And it's just a matter of speaking differently to different audiences. Like here we are saying things that we don't know who's going to hear it, and um yeah, I don't know. I think because we don't know who's going to hear whatever we have to say, it does merit a different level of caution than you would
yeah,
have just talking to a friend in private.
yeah.
Which it's weird. It feels like almost like gross saying that, right? Because it's almost like, oh well, we have to be like a little bit fake or something like that. But I don't
Mhm.
know.
I'm pretty okay with it. I think it's just something where you have to be you really got to know your shit if you're gonna be putting forward this claim. It's the kind of thing where, I think that one of the better examples of going after someone is, when someone like Tucker Carlson, is himself vaccinated to go to all these events and stuff, but, is talking, about like, how untested the vaccine is, very clearly casting, doubts on it. I think that's the kind of situation where you can have a really strong case as, sort of get a couple jabs in there and point out some clear hypocrisy, especially to try and reach the people that are sort of, falling for this stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's a rare scenario where I'd be talking to somebody and I'm actively interested in impugning their character. And like even
Yeah.
if they're saying something that I don't think they really believe, I'm generally not worried about even pointing it out because like you said before, like I can I can still have a discussion, like even if I think they're just totally fake and playing a character, I can still have a conversation with the character with.
Yeah.
Um,
Doing a reaction stream isn't enough. That's just higher effort posting. No, if you have the chance to talk to them face to face, it's time for retribution. The only issue is how to make it happen while wearing the topic as a disguise. Something like,
does anyone who wasn't always already a fan of Milo in this debate, do you have a good opinion of him after this? After he spends the entire debate whining and just going off about completely irrelevant points while he tries to think of an answer to the question.
For those of you that have heard about me through that Milo debate over a year ago, do you remember what it was about? Do you remember any points I made, any indication that you benefited from all the research I did? That didn't seem to be the impact when it happened, and that's not what I focused on when making the highlights video. There's a reason I titled it The Destruction of Milo Yiannopoulos and not Why White Fragility is a Real Thing. To earn the title of debate bro, you need to make a name for yourself as someone who is not only confident about their positions, but willing to challenge others on theirs. To position yourself as correct. And in the absence of formal fact checkers or scoring, being correct can often be about adopting the right aesthetic. One of those aesthetics could be called performative scientism, which, damn, JD, got me again, double kill.
The format encourages you to like hit your opponent with stats and facts and figures because they just appear more convincing. It's like an aesthetic scientism or a performative rationality where numbers make you right.
Speaking of, debate bro.
I think there is a certain truth to that, but I think you have to be really careful not to be overconfident in the idea that, oh, when when I use stats, I'm actually using the right ones. But there, you like right. I think that, but when they're using stats, they're using the bad studies. That's just performative scientism. I think there's a real danger in this line of thinking to sort of assume that you will have the correct question and not sort of grant that reasonable doubt that we talked about last time to your opponent, where it's like, man, it seems like there's room to disagree here, even between experts. Can we truly say that you're not just wrong? You're like you're not even engaging in like real science.
Yeah. It's a delicate balancing act when you're bringing in research that's not just common knowledge
Hmm.
into a debate, right? Because on some level you kind of are asking people to just take your word for it that
Hmm.
like first of all that this evidence exists, secondly that you're interpreting it correctly, thirdly that you are logically applying it in a way that makes sense with your argument. And it's not that they can't check you on those things, because of course it's possible that they can, but in most cases they simply won't, and therefore
Yeah.
they kind of just you you are implicitly asking most people to trust you on with the understanding that they aren't actually going to be fact checking you on
Yeah.
everything. And this is kind of a price that I think you kind of have to pay, because it's better than the alternative of never bringing evidence to bear
Yeah.
in a debate, but it's still a delicate thing to handle.
Yeah, and I think the thing that really makes this difficult is there's like these three categories. There are clearly like really bad bunk studies. I think like especially in like the climate change debate, there are some notorious ones that are like just absolutely ridiculous to apply in this way. And you know that's one category. Then you have the category of like really accepted studies that are universally. But then you have these things in the middle where like there can sometimes be room for disagreement among the experts, and it's really dangerous to try and categorize those as being on that same level of just like total nonsense.
Yeah, and then I wonder sometimes, should we debate those cases differently depending on what audience we're in front of, right? Because
Hmm.
in cases where there is room to disagree among the experts, well, first of all, in most fields of expertise, I am not an expert and really just can't
Yeah,
weigh in on that. I do have some genuine expertise, but then, like, am I actually going to go on like a prime panel and start arguing with physics about somebody else with a physics background? Like I could,
or
but
two
then
people that don't have a physics background. That's I think the real killer, where there's some study that it seems like there's room for disagreement on, and it's the town village trying to pick it apart. I remember this would be a thing that would happen in my debate type commonly, is if they had a good piece of evidence, you had like a checklist to go down and be like, okay, is this study out of date by 10, 15 years? Well, if it is, I'm going to say that that's particularly relevant to this field. If we were talking about like chemistry, 15 years isn't irrelevant, but solar power, that is. And it's like, well, is that actually the case? The problem is that in order to make these claims, you just have a lot of background knowledge. These are really complex things, and it feels like without knowing the context of what is and isn't relevant, you could almost impugn any study.
yeah, well, well, and there's an incentive for you to impugn
Oh yeah.
almost in any study, right? Like, if it's a competitive debate, then there's an explicit incentive, and if it's just a prime panel or something, there's still obviously people are there to perform. They're
Yeah, to
there
argue.
trying to win.
They
They're
want to
there
win.
because their ego is on the line in some in almost all
Hmm.
cases. So yeah, I mean, people really want to just any study that's brought against them. It's like, oh, well, have you really examined the methodology in a sufficient level of detail that you can like tell me that there's nothing wrong with this? It's like, I don't
Hmm.
know.
That also reminds me, just a couple minutes before this, Jangles talks about the idea, audiences want someone who can confidently assert their opinion and like destroy the opinions of others, and how that is very warping. Where it sort of goes back to his earlier point on grifting, which is like, man, there's so many forces trying to push you towards being the blood sportsy debate bro, as opposed to having the genuine heartfelt connection. It actually reminds me, I don't know if you were aware, if you've ever seen this video. It's there's a great YouTube video by a guy named JJ McCullough, talking about the problem with political punditry. And it's his perspective as someone who is sort of like a Canadian politics like cable TV pundit, like a guy who would like show up on like the Fox News or MSNBCs of Canadian politics, and how these formats will really encourage you to just sort of crank up on the assertiveness and correctness. And he sort of uses Ben Shapiro as like a case study of like the tragedy of what can happen, where he sort of makes the case that Ben Shapiro kind of is probably a bit embarrassed by his earlier conduct as just being this hyper rational, hyper correct, always has the logical mathematical position.
Yeah, so that definitely, I have not seen the video that you're talking about, but that sounds really interesting, and maybe we should like keep that in our back pocket and review
Yeah.
it one of these days. But yeah.
Pro is a term for a reason. Because of that win-lose mentality most people have when going into debate, it favors people who are comfortable with what has been called ritualized opposition. Public display followed by argument and challenge. Please don't take this as any sort of biological essentialist argument. It could be 100% socialization and it would still be true. but women seem to be far less comfortable with adversarial argument. Of course, there are people of all stripes out there who are incredible at debate, but as long as white and cis and straight and male are seen as the defaults, everyone else has to deal with being assigned a perspective as a result of those identities, regardless of what their actual views are. By that, I mean white people can have a neutral view on critical race theory, but black people are motivated. Straight people aren't emotionally invested in gay marriage, so their support can actually be logical. Of
I
course,
think a
trans
lot of what
people
he's
want
saying is reversed in the context of Twitch. I,
Mhm.
I think like what he's saying is generally true. If you were to just talk to random average people about those kinds of issues, like race and gender type issues, I think most people would view the straight white male perspective as being the relatively neutral one, where and then ascribe it, the conflicted interests to whatever other like marginalized groups. But on Twitch, I think it's just a leftist space enough that you get perceived as being out of the norm for having the privileged position or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah, I think the trouble is that everyone's perspective is going to be biased in some sort of way, and that can be both valuable and it has both pros and cons. And it's a really like hard thing, I think, for people to sort of sort through the idea that, having personal experience with something can both be a boon and a downfall at the same time. And the other thing is, I just feel like this is, example 5 million of, left-leaning people having this interesting idea that's like another lens for analysis, and then just blowing up to be like, this is the definitive fact of the matter, and this is the way to see it. Particularly cringe people will make arguments like, like, oh, you can't possibly escape the lens that you are seeing this through as like a white man, which is, obviously just really cringe and not a good thing to say optically or argumentatively. And it's an idea that I think is well, I can't say unfairly maligned because people do take it too far, but if we could just moderate, I think it'd be a lot more amenable to people.
Yeah. So, man, that's such a big thing. Like idea of people accusing each other of coming at an issue from a certain point of view, because it's like, um, because it's hard to deny it, right? Like obviously it's true.
Yeah, because it's
We do
true.
all have our biases, and all of the opinions that we come into any debate with are going to be shaped by our background and our experiences, and which demographic group we come from and all that kind of stuff. There's nothing like wrong about it, except for the fact that they're focusing on that at the expense of any other angle of analysis at the debate.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think, man, there's just so many examples of if you could just apply these ideas in like to like different examples, you could onboard a lot more people. If you're sitting down, in the Fox News town hall for like a presidential primary and said, I am eternally grateful, to our veterans, but those issues of military, that's just always going to be different to veterans than me. When they have had that experience of putting their life on the line. Not to say that I'm automatically wrong. I still have my opinions, but I need to acknowledge, that I'm coming at it from a different place than the people who have actually, walked that life. You can do something like that, and like that. I think that would really speak to like conservative rural people, like nodding along and stuff. Man, just
But that's
people just
that's the conservative equivalent of a lot of this stuff that happens
yeah,
on Twitch. Like
exactly.
these
Like, they
leftist
believe in
spaces.
these ideas already. It's just, but like for some reason, we're like, let's just make it unpalatable as possible for literally no reason, and it's just very frustrating.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm sure you've seen there's a famous video of it's like a meeting of a socialist club or something like that, and the people are getting up there and going, "Point of privilege. I am a white
Oh
straight
yeah.
male." Like I'm sure you've
I know the
seen
exact
this
video.
before,
Well,
right?
the funny
But
thing is that video. I think the really funny thing is most people don't realize when they say point of privilege, that's not even like a white privilege thing. That's like old school like parliamentarian. Like that's something that people would do in another type of debate where you have this very proper and prim like, may I approach the floor, stuff like this.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I was under the impression by the way they said it that it seemed to be an intentional double meaning.
Yeah, I think it took on an extra meaning for them as well.
Yeah, so it's easy for people to see like the awkwardness of a video like that, and to think like, oh, the problem with it is all this like focus on identitarian stuff. But like you were saying, it's not really that, because people just generally do believe in the identitarian stuff, but then but people are somehow convinced that they don't, and then and then when they see it done in a super awkward way, it's just it's very like validating to their mistaken idea that they do have the neutral perspective that isn't like
Hmm.
biased by their own
Yeah.
background. Yeah.
Trans affirmative healthcare. So we need a cis dude to objectively parse out the data. I don't know if it's incredibly widespread, but the perception of outgroup bias is strong enough that for some people, the worst advocates for a particular community are members of that community. Because you can't be unbiased if you're advocating for yourself. This is where I absolutely vibe with JD's criticism of the Western sense of objectivity. If you are the default, it's very easy to confuse that with not having a perspective on something, with conflating your lens with the true lens. The truth is,
We got
all of
a
us,
comment from
all of us,
Wick that I want to read. He says
Go for it.
it's performative. They are signaling to their peeps, and the signal is stronger because they're willing to be offensive to everyone not in the tribe.
Yep, that's a huge that I think that's a huge part of, because I said earlier, oh, they're making their message unpalatable for literally no reason. No, they're making their message much more palatable to people like them for a very good reason, which is they want to appeal to they want to preach to the choir. Um, it just sort of has the unintended effect of then being, very not appealing to other people.
It's hard for me to say that it's unintended necessarily, because the fact that it is unpalatable to outsiders makes it a stronger indication of like the in-group membership.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, because now that I'm thinking about it, it's like I felt more strongly about that idea that it's really is unintentional previously. But man, these days, especially when we're talking about like Twitch politics, really like online parts of the internet, people are just, people are just crazy, man. They just want blood. They want to appear as like as offensive and avant-garde as possible. They want to trigger the libs or own the Republicans or whatever it is. Yeah, I think that's a really good insight. That at this point, being unappealing to the other side is in and of itself unappeal to your own side. It's like it's almost like oh God, like a hazing ritual, like proving yourself.
Yeah, as long as the group that you're trying to signal membership to has just like a tiny bit of cult mentality about it, then that's going to be the
Hmm.
case. So like it has to be like us against them on some level,
Yeah.
and then it'll be true. Yeah.
have but one set of eyes and ears, and pretending you have a more objective perspective on someone else's life is almost always an expression of the systemic power you have over them. However, all that being said, Part 3, we need debate no matter how much you hate it. To restate my thesis for this video, I don't need anyone who doesn't already like debate to suddenly love it. I only want to quell some of the bad faith assumptions as to why we like it. I've already talked about how debate can play a role in deepening knowledge by tapping into more complex aspects than simple recollection of facts, and how that can be a valuable tool in tackling complicated issues. I also want to stress that this isn't universal and that some people might not get anything out of debate for a variety of entirely valid reasons. Anyone who says that you're not truly confident in your ideas or positions unless you're willing to debate them on a live stage is usually just an asshole. With some exceptions. It all comes down to individual differences in how
Oh,
we
is
learn
that
and
supposed to
how
be
we
like
address
Steven
conflict.
Crowder and Sam
Debate.
Cedar? Is that
Yeah,
what?
I think it is. Yeah, there's I don't know the guy's name, but I mean, yeah, it's kind of messed up, Jangles. You're not giving like a little like shout out to whoever actually made that video. Anyways, but
Yeah.
I'm maybe it's in the description. Anyways,
So,
yeah, it's some guy who makes specific videos of like trying to like satirize like conservative pundits and stuff with very like sort of exaggerated over the top animations. I think there's one of like Dennis Prager's jaw like unclenching and opening like 5 feet wide as he devours babies or something. Like it's pretty out there.
we got a comment from Yamato. He says, "I'm sorry, that makes no sense. Of course, I'm going to be biased when I'm speaking about myself." Yeah, I mean, we agree. You are going to, and it's um, simultaneously like it can be a problem that that's the case, but that also shouldn't be used to discount your opinion when you are
Yeah.
speaking about
it's
yourself.
it's good to be aware. everyone is biased. No one descends from heaven as like an objective, logic lord. And I think there's value in recognizing what each person's individual biases are. It's just people go way too far where they say, oh, you're individually biased, so you have nothing of value to say, and everything you say is wrong and forever tainted by insert identity that I don't like.
Yeah, exactly. I like the way you said that, because it's for sure worth noting the specific way in which people are biased. But it's a lot of times people won't just say it that way. A lot of times they'll just say you are biased because
Yeah.
of this and this and
And
this.
it's something to use in tandem. It's like I would only ever deploy this if I'm having a back and forth conversation with someone, and it feels like they're being, let's say, overly charitable to the military because of their personal experience. That I would want to engage with them for like a good half hour to an hour first, and then start to be like, man, when you say this, when you say the military is full of good people, and I'm trying to point out, well, all humans are good people, but of course the military is going to have bad people like anyone else. I feel like your unwillingness to accept that might be coming from your personal experience with very good people in the military, and that's understandable. But I feel like that you're letting that like I would want to be deploying it very specifically, because that's the other thing. It's so dismissive when you utilize these arguments before the debate has even begun, right? A person will just state their thesis, and then someone will be saying, "Oh, I can see your biases are, taking you over here." Just based off your thesis statement. I can tell you're biased because you disagree with me. It's almost how it comes off. And it's like, man, you didn't even listen to what I had to say.
And people will discount like not only a specific person or a specific line of argument, they'll discount like an entire media source, right? They'll be like,
Oh yeah.
I don't want to watch this channel because it's I don't want to watch Fox News because it's biased or something like that. And like on some level, I can't blame them. It's like, well, you only have a limited amount of time, and maybe you don't want to spend it watching Fox News. I can't say you're
Yeah.
wrong to make that decision, but the reason really shouldn't just be because they're biased, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like any news source that you consume is biased. It's like you may not like the specific way in which Fox News is biased. It, I
You should
feel
be
a
able to get
little.
to the flawed media source like Fox News, probably.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think is the other part.
I mean, I'm specifically bringing up Fox News just because it's such a notorious, famous example of one that
Hmm.
gets called biased all the time, and I agree. It is like, not only is it true that they are biased, but it's just like so extremely obvious, right? And and
Yeah.
and and there's the weird irony of them. Their old marketing tagline was that they're fair and balanced, as if to accuse everyone else but them of being biased, right?
Hmm.
So
But even I think Fox News is a great example. You actually remind me, there was a specific moment I had in a debate a long time ago where I was using this Fox News article, and someone said, oh, that's from Fox News, so we can just ignore it. And I think I dedicated like 3 minutes to just really tear that apart in front of the judge, saying, obviously Fox News is biased. We need to be demonstrating why that is. Fox News is not, and this was this is actually like a piece of written journalism by Fox News, which, to be clear, the written Fox News stuff isn't perfect, but it is a lot better than like listening to Sean Hannity or Tucker Carlson. Those people, especially if you would go back like 3 or 4 years before all the same people left Fox News, unfortunately,
yeah.
it was a lot better. And just talk about, but if that's the case, then show me, point it out. If Fox News is so blinded by their conservative view, then why don't you go ahead and show me that instead of just assuming that it's the case? And I
Yeah.
think that's the key. People, it's just I think almost people latch onto this as another way to just find a reason to ignore someone, which is, I think, is a phenomenon, right? When you see someone disagrees with you, you're just looking for a reason to be like to tell yourself almost more than anything else, oh, this is why that person's wrong. And them being biased because they're like a cis white man, or because they're like some lib soy beta cuck who hasn't lived a real hard life, hasn't worked a minimum wage job. Oh, well, then I could just ignore everything they're saying.
Yeah.
Either as a viewer or a participant, is a great way for some people to refine ideas. By now, I hope we can all agree that being able to structure and synthesize facts after you learn them is important for anyone who wants to make actual use of that information. The best way to accomplish that is going to be enormously different from person to person. Just because a mode of knowledge isn't right for you doesn't mean it's not right for me. Contrary to the smarmy tone of this video, I don't think highly of myself. I think I'm kind of stupid. That's not me being self-deprecating. Trust me, I have a healthy ego. The main reason being that I think the recognition of my own stupidity is my greatest strength. I know a lot about a few things and very little about everything else. So the best way I found to determine whether or not an idea or argument I have is good is to test it via direct verbal conflict, to see if
Base.
someone I respect sees fault in what I have to say. I tried to make this clear to my husband and my friends. I will argue a position I'm not sure about in order to see if that position is good, if it can stand up to basic scrutiny. Sometimes I've fucked up and fought with people I didn't mean to upset, and that's on me. But for those closest to me who are willing to help me indulge in that process, I hope they know it's been an invaluable source of self-improvement, and for that, I'm eternally grateful. Because this is how I learn. For me, nothing really sticks unless I can put it into my own words, unless I can put it into novel situations, unless I know enough to describe and analyze and synthesize the information in those higher tiers of Bloom's taxonomy. I can pass a recollection test easy. My college transcript is full of A's in classes I don't remember taking and could for the life of me give accurate information on now. But some of the classes, the ones I thought more about, the ones that required more abstract thought that I applied to my future career, the ones I think back on when I'm making video essays about why trans women deserve to be in sport, or why system justification theory helps to explain modern biases, have stuck with me for, at the risk of showing my age, a decade or more. And I think it's entirely fair to expand this beyond the interpersonal and into the realm of society. If you're in this sphere of the internet, you're probably interested in doing some form of activism, or at the very least supporting it. By watching debates, I get to see a different version of the opposition's argument than I would if I were just reading an article or watching a scripted video. Specifically, I get to see how, or if, they're able to respond to direct criticism, how deep their understanding is of the sources they use, and if their stated reason for supporting something is covering up for
Yeah.
something deeper that's revealed under pressure. It doesn't matter if it's just some random nerd in their basement on a 12-viewer panel. Most of the population is just some random nerd, and the fact that the average person has much greater access to platforms can be really useful in getting a feel for what a wide variety of people think. Engaging in frequent debates, especially on a specific topic, can be like a stand-up comic refining their jokes from show to show. You can tighten phrasing here, cut out a joke that bombs there, and find out where in the act the hecklers tend to shout out. Some people refine their ideas by writing them down in script format, some by checking them against established authors and speakers, and some people do best with direct verbal arguments against someone who holds the position you want to challenge. Again, I'm addressing this video to people who want to see some sort of political and social change occur. So regardless of your preferred medium, at some point, just having good ideas isn't enough. You have to make an argument. You have to engage in some sort of conflict. To be on the left in any capacity is to want change, to push the status quo in a better direction, while at the same time flattening the top-down hierarchy that would normally impose such changes. So unless you're the type of leftist, with a poster of Chairman Mao on your wall you got from Amazon, whose primary mode of activism is posting guillotine memes, the only way we're going to achieve any of our goals is through convincing people to change their minds. And I feel like some of us forget that that requires talking to people who don't already want those things. Can I be open and honest for a second? I'm assuming most of the people watching the video at this point are at least sort of left-leaning, so you'll be open to me expressing my feelings on the subject, understanding that the systems I grew up and operate within influence my perceptions on all phenomena. I'm a gay man who grew up in an incredibly conservative and rural environment who has had to argue and justify my own existence to people who now used to be my family, sometimes at risk of actual violence and sometimes resulting in actual violence. I take any and all responsibilities I could possibly have with my minuscule platform very seriously, and I do not put dozens of hours of work into researching and writing videos on the topics I cover for basically no money because I don't care deeply about them. Okay? Okay, so, to my fellow lefties, we suck at handling conflict. And by far the largest problem we have in our rhetoric is taking the real problem of the asymmetrical consequences of conflict for privileged and marginalized groups and catastrophizing that to mean that
How
all
old is this
conflict is
video?
inherently dangerous.
I'm not sure here. I can set it out. Let's see. September 3rd of last year. So
Oh,
what,
not that
like,
old.
yeah, 6-9 months, something like that.
That's interesting because when he's saying the thing about the leftists suck at conflict, that was like a big talking point like 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like that has dissipated a lot as we've gotten a more confrontational left over the last few years.
I think it's kind of true. It feels like a spoke out from a much more central idea, which is often this sort of I think overly done critique of the online left as being, they're too inflammatory, they're not good at real world action, they eat their own, they have lots of infighting, and I think a lot of these critiques are true, but are leveraged in such a way that are where the claim is these are uniquely bad in the left as opposed to the right, and that's something that I really have I've always been very doubtful of. I think that the right is just as flawed. It's just very much the grass is greener, in combination with the fact that we just don't see, the right. The right isn't out in the open on the internet in the same way that the left is. Partially because all the deplatforming they're off in Telegram channels and stuff like this. And I think that people really underestimate, how much like people on like the alt right or the dissident right or whatever the fuck you want to call the schizos on the right that are on the internet, whatever you want to call them. I think they have a lot of the same problems that like crazy lefties have, where they're like, okay, how are we going to get people to vote? And then there's some guy talking about like, and this is why the Rothschild Bible is the architect by which neoconservatives have cucked the conservative movement with Israel and stuff like that. And I'm just like, dude, like what the fuck are you talking about? And he's like, oh, I see, you're also you're cucked out, more constitution, stuff like this. And maybe that's just my experience of having sort of gone down that rabbit hole, but I feel like there's a ton of vitriol and a lot of the same problems. It's just they're a lot smaller, so and they're a lot less visible.
Um, Even so, like I think that idea that the left was very like averse to conflict and too afraid to fight or something. I think it didn't come from nowhere because it does seem like the whole online debate bro phenomenon arose on the right before it arose on the left.
Hmm. Maybe. I don't know. The problem is that I think that as you start to try and look through history to try and come up with examples, the idea of a contiguous left and a contiguous right that we can analyze, I think becomes like basically not true, Because like the example I would go to is like, man, you should tell that to like the Italian prime minister who got killed by those like communist insurgents during the years of lead. And it's like, but at that point, there would be some real people who would be like, no, dude, Stalinists aren't lefties, dude. Those are actually, right wing fascists and stuff like this. Or like, they talk about like the gulags under Stalin. And at this point, it's like, man, like, we're talking about like Hitler and Stalin. Like, is this really analogous to like Destiny's subreddit fighting over whether or not Britney is like a bad person? Like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. Like so I'm not trying to make that claim with respect to real world politics. I'm just specifically trying to make that claim with respect to social media because it does seem
Hmm.
like there was a rise of the debate bro archetype and like I guess a lot of the people I'm thinking of would fall under the anti SJW umbrella.
Yeah.
I think that became prevalent, but before the kind of more recent left and center left
I
debate
think that
bros.
did I think that did become more prevalent, but the question that I would ask is that because left wing of some inherent difference between the current left wing and right wing that operate today, or other factors? I think there's a real truth to the idea that when you run into like a conservative on like a prime panel, generally that person is going to be better tooled than your average lefty, because in order to survive in this space as a conservative, because it's a very left leaning space, you got to be on a higher level. They lefties almost have white privilege when it comes to like panels and stuff, where their ideas are the ones that, generally speaking, in like a prime case panel, are going to be a lot more accepted than like someone who's coming up and saying, I'm for traditional marriage between a man and a woman. That person is either going to get is going to get attacked a lot, and that's going to weed out. I think a lot of the not to say that, I don't want to say weaker people, because people who are not as prepared to really go toe to toe in the debate space. Not that that makes you a better or worse person, of course.
Uh, yeah, so what do you make of the idea of people on the left being kind of like sensitive snowflakes or whatever? Because I'm sure we've all met people like that, but it's like hard to say like is it actually true that that's more prevalent on the left than it is on the right? What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a question that I don't think anyone is capable of answering to any real degree of certainty, because of the limits of like what testing we can do on this and how fickle these things are, and is additionally a can of worms that's not worth opening. It's very much like the, okay, if I'm a snowflake, then like destroy me in the debate, bro. Like, can we just get to the actual fucking argument, please? I don't want to spend the next 5 minutes listening to you say why I'm a snowflake. I want to hear the next 5 minutes of you explaining why the study that I linked is wrong or something like this,
Yeah, well,
or tearing apart my logic.
I don't think you would be the person that they direct that at, though, right? I think that the idea is the left doesn't, or like this was the talking point 5 years
Yeah.
ago. It was the left is afraid to debate. They don't want to debate because they're gonna get their fifis hurt or something.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think there are people on the left that do this, but like if the left has a unique problem, I don't know, it's such a hard problem to sort out because the left and the right operate in different spaces and that are going to form have people, socially form in different ways. And is that an inherent part, or is it just a coincidence that rural conservatives are, against gay marriage, versus, being for it and the cities against things like this? I think it's really difficult to try and sort out any kind of truth there.
Yeah, I mean, like to say that it's just a coincidence. I think it's not, but it's just. I mean, the reasons it's not a coincidence. It's hard to tie those reasons to the whole idea of people being like, oh, hypersensitive snowflakes or something like that. I don't know.
Hmm.
Um, we had a comment from Wick who said, "We live in a weird time where the messenger is almost always more important than the message." I don't think that's.
True.
I don't. Well, the part I want to object to is where he says that that's weird, because I think that
Oh yeah, kind of true. Yeah.
that's kind of just pretty normal for how people think.
Yeah. If it
Unfortunately.
yeah, it feels like a lot of the problems that we're experiencing with internet discourse are like these are problems that had always existed, but god damn if they aren't getting more pronounced in the last 5 years. Like it
It,
really feels. I don't know if you've ever seen. There's a famous YouTube video by I think Reason TV where they go political attack ads circa 1800, and they have a bunch of clips of like the 2008 or I think it's the 2012 election of news pundits remarking on, wow, this election is getting dirty. It's taking dirty to a whole new level, and then they play audio of people reading real quotes from attack ads in 1800 that are just out of this world, talking about how like Thomas Jefferson was raised by like an Indian squaw, eating like corn husks and stuff like this. That's just totally out of this world. And the point is like, okay, this has kind of always been around, but man, I really feel like these problems have existed, but they're getting to a new level.
yeah, I don't know if I believe that or not. I mean, it's just really hard to say. I mean, I definitely think there's more attention being paid to those problems, and maybe they're more visible now. I kind of don't really think they're new, though. I mean,
Hmm.
well, I mean, as we've already agreed that they're not new, but I mean, even like the to say the prevalence is increasing, I'm just undecided on that question. I'm not
Yeah,
convinced
it's
that.
a really hard thing to sort out.
And again, I get it. It can be exhausting, especially if that conflict revolves around your right to exist or the oppression you experience. I'm not and will never say that you, personally, have to do anything to advance a cause or fight against bigotry. But some of you get mad when other people do that. You're helping fascism spread by debating a fascist. You're legitimizing transphobia by telling transphobes why they're wrong to their face. You're supporting the right when you go to their events to argue the left-wing perspective to an audience that never hears it. This perspective screams to me that everyone who isn't already on our side is dangerous, and that anything other than shunning them will harm the community. When engaging is a risk, you don't. This leads to the infamous but all too common refrain that goes something like, "You are incredibly wrong on this issue, but you need to put in the work yourself. It's not my job to educate you." Now, if you're just a person trying to go about your day and some asshole steps in to demand that you defend your own existence, hell yeah, this is the correct response. But if you want to be an advocate or claim to be an advocate, at some point that literally is your job, and you're better off saying nothing. This
Otherwise, you have
sentiment
to
will not
advocate.
motivate someone to educate themselves. It's pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but woke. I want to circle back to an earlier point I made about knowledge, specifically the relationship between student and teacher. If the students aren't learning, if the gap between them and the teacher is never crossed, does it matter how much the teacher knows? What good does all that knowledge do if the students remain unconvinced? What good is your good idea if you can't get other people to agree with it? Climate change is real, and it's being caused by humans. That is the truth. A lot of people are motivated to not believe in it, and it will be much more difficult to solve this crisis if we can't convince people to vote for leaders who take it seriously. What about vaccines? According to study and poll published in Place, a fucked up percentage of people think that the COVID vaccine is an experimental elixir that may or may not let Bill Gates see a video feed of you taking a dump at Outback Steakhouse. As frustrating as it may be, we need to admit that calling them idiots does nothing. What does the UK think about trans people? Or, more pertinently, what do the platforms in the UK present as the key points of discussion around trans people? Is it accurate? Is it in any way fair? The first draft of this script was, as first drafts often are, pretty off the cuff. Just me putting my feelings down on paper without much regard for who my audience was or how it was going to be received. I gave it to my husband, who is my primary proofreader, and who absolutely hates debates, and he woke me up the next morning to let me know I wasn't convincing anyone by being such a smug asshole, belittling everyone who dares go against me. I was essentially writing a video dunking on the anti-debate side, which might be cathartic and enjoyable for everyone who already agrees with me, but would do absolutely nothing to bridge the gap between us, and may in fact add fuel to the fire burning it down.
It's funny
So
that
please, tell
like
me if I'm
in the process of arguing for debate as a mode of public discourse, he actually had to moderate his own debate bro tendencies to be
Mhm.
less of one.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jangles does make a good point in this video. This sort of tactical concession that, like, yeah, of course, there are ways to do debate wrong or bad, and I'm not going to defend those. But then I think he really does the good job of then the central thrust of like, okay, but you guys aren't just attacking the bad debates. You guys are, you know, your guys' attacks go way beyond those. They are going after good debates that actually do real positive things for like the space.
Yeah, so I remember when we first started watching this video last week, you, that we were kind of like making fun of his original thesis, which is like debate is sometimes good when done correctly.
Yeah, I think because at the core of it, I don't disagree, but I just think worded in that way, you know, it's really meaningless. Like, I think he needs to have a much stronger claim that, hey, most of debate is done well. Most of debate that we see happening today is good and has value.
Mm-hmm.
wrong in my estimation here. It's not that anti-debate lefties can't deal with conflict. It's that they're uncomfortable with the immediacy of live conflict, of live debate, of the unfiltered sewage that may flow from the uncurated presentation of terrible ideas, and the types of personalities they see drawn to it. I did a video on otherization some years back that, again, no one watched, but the research I did for it stuck with me. Threat is a diagnosis. One drop of poison makes a poisoned drink. One rock to the back of the head outweighs a lifetime of cooperation. The worst opinion someone has could be more important in your evaluation of them than whatever else they believe. The veil of the internet gives us a slew of options to place protective barriers between ourselves and the threats we face, of fighting back from a safe distance. Getting into an argument on Twitter is several steps removed from a live discussion over voice chat, which itself is several steps removed from an IRL argument. You can still counter someone's bigotry without risking your physical safety when you're both boxes of text on a screen. Likewise, it's much safer to engage with a shitty position when you can pause and collect yourself and think about how best to respond without having to worry about a chud who's only there to own the insert term here. I really want to make it clear that I do not think less of people who limit their engagement with the opposition to articles
Any
or video
pause?
essays or even tweets.
So so now I'm thinking about this point he just said about the taking your time to think about what you have to say, and how that contrasts with the perception that people are really good at debate if they're really good at the immediacy of it, right? Like, so like just
Yeah,
really quickly coming up with good responses and quips and things like that, right? Where it seems like it should almost be the opposite, right? Like perhaps we should reward people for taking their time to think about what they have to say before just as opposed to people who speak
yeah.
before they think.
I think it's just a trade-off of the gained accuracy or educational value of sort of taking your time where, you know, people are not going to be able to get away with, you know, linking some study that's full of shit because the responses are going to be like a day apart versus the fact that, man, it's a lot harder to get to people if you're like, watch this series of like response videos back and forth compared to like watch this screaming match.
I almost wonder if you could do some weird kind of combination of the two, where you first have like a long form written debate that occurring slowly with what well thought out responses. Then you like put on a stage play of people like saying those
Reenactment,
points back to each other. So you're like
dramatization.
simulating it as with all the drama of a
Yeah,
spontaneous
maybe.
debate, but with actually the well thought out points of it.
Yeah,
I,
that could be.
obviously that um it's fake in a way that people are sometimes going to hate, right? Because I'm almost
Mhm.
suggesting like the pro wrestling version of of a debate or
Yeah,
something, but but maybe
maybe.
people would like it. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think that's not a half bad idea.
You can do amazing work only doing asymmetrical responses on a number of platforms, and it would be dishonest and disrespectful to the incredible creators who have inspired me to pretend that opting not to do debate is some sort of stain on one's character. There's a reason I do both video essays and debates, but I think it's fair for me to expect the same courtesy, because activism is multifaceted. There are 3 aspects of activism according to me, the 3 C's, if you will: comfort, convince, and counter. Comfort is community support, providing a safe space for a given community either for their own self-expression or, even better, a physical and financial space in which people can be free from persecution and conflict. Convince is what you think it is, and it's probably what most debate advocates picture as the goal of debate, getting people to agree with you that previously did not. And counter is the opposite of comfort, debunking the other side, rebuking arguments made by the people in opposition to you in order to either demoralize them so they stop showing up, or to look better to the people you may be able to convince. All of them are important. If you call yourself an activist, you want things to change, which means you want people to change. And unless you're the type of activist who unironically opines on which bread tubers would get the wall during the revolution, you'd prefer people to change under their own volition, by changing their mind because it's the right thing to do. Everyone on the left is on board with comfort. That's the safe spaces, the shelters, the centers victims can reach out to find some sort of respite from the abuse and vitriol of the world. The people who
I
create
mean,
and
I
run
think
these
a lot of
centers
people
are
on the left are
heroes,
like
far beyond anything.
half-heartedly on board with with the safe space thing.
Yeah, it's or
I
sorry,
don't
go ahead.
know like almost anybody who's like 100% on board with it, but likewise, I don't know almost anybody who's 100% against it.
Yeah, it's a good idea when used correctly, but I think people just went way too far with it as per usual, where every space needs to now be a safe space. And the idea that there are spaces that aren't safe is something that needs to be like confronted and like retroactively turned into safe spaces, I don't think is very helpful. I really like this point. I don't like the way he goes about it, but the idea that there are going to be niche appeals and that individually any one of those niche appeals obviously isn't that important because they're niche. But if a movement wants to appeal to society, society is made up of a lot of niches out there that we need people to go and speak to. That's a really important idea that I think isn't acknowledged. I think like someone like Destiny is a great example of like, look, Destiny is probably never gonna be, going up on stage and speaking to the American public in a way where like a big chunk of society is going to be nodding along necessarily. But his strength is that there was especially originally, there was this niche of the sort of like the gaming space that it seemed like left-leaning ideas couldn't penetrate, and he was just like the antidote. He was able to come in and really speak to a group of people that other people on the left couldn't, and spread those ideas. I think it's really important that there are Destinies, there are Bastiats, there are IRIs, there are Jangles, all these different people to appeal to different kinds of group. And so to be, it takes a village to raise a kid, it takes a streaming community to push an idea. And to push acceptance, and that's so important, pushing all these different groups, because that's how you eventually move the needle on public opinion, which is really hard work that takes a long time. But if you can do it, the results just flow from themselves. I'm thinking that I think gay marriage is one of the best examples of this, where all the movement to get people to normalize and accept the gay people eventually reached this watershed moment, and in the course of like what is not at all a very long time, it's black and white, the difference in how our society treats and talks about gay people.
The fact that that transition happened so quickly suggests to me that most people really didn't actually have strong opinions on it in the first place,
Hmm.
or else they never could have done that kind of 180. It makes me think that it's like average people were just having
Hmm.
performative opinions on the
Yeah,
topic.
I think there's a lot of like just sort of casual homophobia. I think very much the opinion was I don't hate them. I don't think it's it's just that just is not the definition of marriage. That's all. It's almost like an academic distinction. And but yeah, I think that Jangles is really hitting the nail on the head here on an important point that a lot of people miss, which is that you need different kinds of advocates for the same movement to get to different groups of people.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. What do you make of his other thing about the like he was saying the 3 different goals of a debate, because it seems like his
That
second.
is, I think, or sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the 3 he said was convince, and it seems like when you talk to people about debate, they really tend to focus a lot on that one, and not on the like comfort and what counter I think was the third one.
Yeah.
Um, so like the idea of debate as a comfort thing, it seems a little bit counterintuitive, but I think that the idea of debate as a counter strategy is something that I have thought about a lot in the past, and I used to like debate people on religion a lot, and it is my opinion that this is like largely the function of like religious apologetics. It's
Yep.
mostly not to convert non-religious people. It's mostly to counter attempts to deconvert religious people.
Yeah, I think one of the strongest arguments has always been, look, even if it's not true, there's great utility provided to these people. It's very funny. I think some of the strongest arguments for, traditional Christian conservative values is almost this postmodernist lens of like, it doesn't matter if nothing's true, bro. This is useful to us, which I always thought was really funny and ironic, but is I think, a very good argument. Um, I get where he's going at with these categories, but I think a you're going to be losing a lot of fidelity if you try and just sort of boil it down to like these three categories of like, oh, these are the three ways we change people's minds, and this is the thing that debate does. Arguably, what we're always trying to convince people, and some people are going to be more convinced when they're confronted versus some people are being more convinced when they're more comforted. And what does it truly mean to comfort versus confront? I think it gets pretty messy pretty quickly. That's why I said I really agree with the point. I don't know if I would go about it explaining it in this way. I would just sort of say, because a lot of these also just come from not even necessarily a difference in comforting, but how do you comfort, right? So if we talk about like talking to religious conservatives versus talking to gamers, I think Destiny would approach these groups very differently, but he would be trying to do the same thing. It's just when he approaches religious conservatives, he's going to be playing out the fact that he went to this Jesuit school and talking about how he absolutely believes in the values of community and stuff like that, and that's going to be a comfort them. Versus I think when Destiny talks to more like online young guys that are mostly gamers and stuff like that, that sort of young male audience, he's going to be getting a certain level of comfort, but not by being very like, oh, the value of community. He's going to be like, God damn it, I'm a rage head in League of Legends, and stuff like this. He might even drop, some like, some light slurs or something like this, to almost ingratiate himself. I think there's something Destiny said a long time ago that always stuck to me, which is that it feels really shitty to say, and it is shitty to say, but I think that the fact that he sometimes uses the R slur, retarded, in gaming, almost gives him some street cred as like being one of the boys. And so I think it's just important to acknowledge, when we say comfort, comforting to different groups is going to be wildly different things.
Yeah. So now I'm trying to put together all these different points that we were talking about in the last few minutes. So do you think it would be okay? You were talking about how like different people are going to have different specialized approaches that allow them to reach different audiences, and
Mhm.
so do you think it might also be the case that I mean, I guess it probably must be that different people are going to be more suited to do the comforting versus the convincing versus the countering?
Yeah, I think so, and especially doing that for different groups. I think Destiny is, so someone like Destiny or just any hypothetical person might be very good at comforting with these groups, but not good at comforting these other groups. And with those other groups, they're going to have to go to convincing or confronting, or a different advocate is going to have to do that.
Hmm. Somebody online says to cancel you for using the R slur, I think.
Yeah. Well, okay, in my defense, I was just quoting, although I do use it offensively, and I really should. It's something I'm trying to work on, but it is just a personal failing of mine.
I have ever done for the world. And that includes the purely online spaces where scared Zoomers try to figure themselves out. I'm not memeing. These real spaces are vital for activism and can in fact go a long ways towards convincing people of a position simply by showing compassion to a group that may otherwise draw scorn. But it can't stop there. The vast majority of people on the left are also fine with countering. Who doesn't love a good debunking video, picking apart the terrible arguments made by right-wing morons? Vacuous as it can sometimes be, streamers have gotten thousands of hours of content watching right-wingers fumble their way through basic logical fallacies and pointing them out. The problem is that a lot of us confuse that with convincing. We think showing that their ideas are wrong and bad will change the mind of someone who agreed with them, and that someone is somewhere watching or reading the stuff we're putting out, right? No, probably not. At least not in any
Oh, I
meaningful
disagree with
capacity.
him on
Most
this.
people don't.
I
What?
think people do actually find it very compelling when you kind of pick apart somebody's position and show the problems with it, and it's not that you're going to convince the person who you're doing that to, or the people who already strongly agree with them, but I think that that's actually very compelling to fence sitters.
hmm I think it's compelling when done correctly because I can think of two worlds where you pick apart a video and you're just like, man, that's a bullshit. Like, don't we all know this is wrong and stuff? Versus where he makes a claim and you pause the video and then like you tab to like some folder you have of ungodly evidence, and the people who are watching are like, oh shit, like this guy's about to get absolutely ripped apart. I think that's the big difference, and I think it sort of gets back to what we were saying last Wednesday. One of the probably the most defining characteristic, from a in in, tr- in terms of just trying to define what a debate is the presence of those two parties in opposition. And part of the reason why it speaks to someone is, in the case of a weak takedown video, the presence of someone being there for the other side would probably counter that, right? If it's the case that Hassan watches a video of Steven Crowder and debunks it, not purely by making it very weakly in a way that's not really accurate. Well, if there had been, not necessarily Steven Crowder, but if there had been someone from the right who was a good debater, then they would have been able to be, that's wrong. Whereas presumably, right, if a takedown is accurate, well then if we play that out in a debate, that would be borne out by the data. Debate is less like is less like an ends in and of itself, but a way to ensure that we're getting to that point where the arguments are the best that are available.
Yeah, up to a point. I think it's it's almost like an
That'll always
evolutionary
work.
algorithm in a way, right? Like
Yeah,
you ever heard of how they do that in AI? Like they'll have like a
the
computer will
bots
like
train the bots. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And the way that they train the bots is by culling out the least effective ones. So it doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily mean that you end up with an optimal solution, but it at least rules out a lot of the bad ones. And I
Yeah.
think that's
And
exactly what's happening in
yeah.
debate. I think it is a kind of evolutionary algorithm in a
And I
way.
think that's why a lot of people prefer. If you talk to the sort of, if you just talk to people generally about why it is that they prefer debate, I think you would get answers like, oh well, if Ben Shapiro was there, Hassan would be able to get away with this. He would get called out. They would say that there would be this sense of, and I'm sure we've all had this reaction where we watch a video where someone's making a point, and we pause the video and be like, wait a minute, what about this point? And the person in the video never addresses it, and we're thinking, okay, well then I think your entire video is fucking wrong. In a debate, the likelihood of that really goes down because there is a representative of ideally both parties going at it. Not to say that it won't always happen. Of course, there can be mistakes and people can mess up and things like that. But it's trying to decrease the likelihood that that kind of stuff happens.
Yeah. So SBO has now said that you're an ethical llama, by the way.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
So by the way, I like he was he it was he that's who pointed out to me recently that your llama thing is from Fortnite. I didn't even know
Yeah.
that before.
I'm gonna be honest. I did not realize it either when I first selected it. I only found out when people were saying the Fortnite llama pinata.
I had assumed that it was from Viva Pinata.
Yeah, me too. That's what I. In fact, I could have sworn that that's what it was named. But no, I looked it up, and yeah, this is definitely the one from Fortnite. I think.
Yeah.
Out media they know they will disagree with in order to be more informed. The closest they'll come is to let that media be filtered through their own, hence the popularity of reaction videos condensing opposing arguments in order to be immediately countered. And hey, I'd love that shit, but we need to be honest and say that most people who watch those types of videos already agreed with the video and just wanted to see something bad get destroyed. So, where does the convincing happen? There's a rule that, as far as I know, was introduced by Destiny called the 40-40-20 rule. 40% of the audience is entrenched on your side, 40% on the other, with 20% in the middle able to be swayed to either. While I think there's something
Man,
to
I think
that, I
there's a
also
lot of
think that's
people that are
overly
like
simplistic.
softly entrenched though.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably like a spectrum, right? You've
Yeah.
got people all the way on the left that are super far entrenched, and then the further you sit, the closer you get to the center, the more unentrenched they become. But I think it's generally true that if we have to draw the line somewhere, more people, particularly in like the online politics space, are going to be more entrenched than less, just because like it's a space that only that is a space that already selects for people that are invested in politics and are then consequentially probably going to be pretty determined.
Yeah, it is for sure. But the thing is, when I've heard people bring this up before, the whole 40-40-20 thing, I'm pretty sure I've heard Destiny say it, and it seemed like he was talking about the audience rather than
Yeah.
rather than the participants, right? So now the
Oh,
audience is
yeah.
still self-selected for being interested in politics, but not quite on the same level that the participants are, right? Because I think
Yeah, that's
with the participants, it would probably even be fewer than 20% of people that are actually open
yeah.
to changing their minds. It
There's
would
probably not even enough people to break it down in most things,
uh,
like in an individual bit. All right, Nick, you are 40% entrenched. I'm 20% unentrenched. Yeah, but yeah,
yeah,
I think Jangles is talking about the audience.
yeah. So like if we're talking about like a specific narrow like I'm trying to think like what audience exactly would this be, right? Because like I was about to say Twitch politics, but actually like I think on Twitch politics it tends to be lopsided enough that you really can't say that there's like 40% on each side that that are
Hmm.
entrenched. It's probably like 60% entrenched leftists, 20% like open, and then 20% entrenched on the right or
Conservatives.
something like that, right? So I don't know, like like when I see people like bring out numbers like this, it makes me want to like fight them on the numbers, and but but maybe I
I'm sure
shouldn't
Destiny
just.
would. Yeah, I'm sure Destiny would admit this is like napkin math, type. Just it just more speaking to like a general idea that like most people are going to be decided.
Yeah, most people within a self-selected narrow audience that's specifically there to hear about the topic at hand are then I'll agree that that's largely true. But I think the bigger the audience you're talking to, the less true that is.
Maybe I don't know. I think the problem is that it feels like this is starting to become much more true of just society generally than just like narrow sectors, where it feels like just normal people that aren't spending their hours on prime K panels. Even they are now starting to become pretty entrenched politically.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I can marshal strong evidence for or against that, but anecdotally, it appears I think it's probably true. I've heard many people say it, and just like intuitively, it sounds right. But you know,
I
look,
think there's a decent amount of data to reflect this in the polling, the sort of bottoming out of the middle. And another piece of evidence that has sort of been borne out more recently, that previously people didn't bring up, is the fact that geographically districts are becoming more red and more blue.
oh
Um,
yeah,
a lot more centered. I know this is actually a really big problem in Canada, where the Canadian political party in like the prairie provinces is winning with like Saddam Hussein numbers, where they get like 85% of the vote and stuff like this. And it's just the case that there really is no alternative, particularly in Canada's political system, where the political parties are very hierarchical, so you can't have like the Freedom Caucus inside the Progressive Conservative Party in Canada. You have to be lock in step with whatever the leader of the party says, and simultaneously, you can't go off and form your own party without risking splitting the vote and really hampering your political effectiveness, which is something that conservatives in Canada are particularly hesitant to do, because there was this era, I think, in like the 80s or the 90s, where there were these two conservative parties, and it just led to like this multi-decade string of losses.
I would have thought that the result of that would be just like a lot of alienated people who feel like they can't identify with any of the like, despite the fact that it's a multi-party system. If each party is like relatively monolithic within it, then people are going to have a hard time finding it. Even if they can identify whichever party they're closest to,
Hmm.
they're gonna have a harder time finding their niche within that party.
I think that is the feeling, particularly among a lot of Canadian conservatives. I don't know if you know Nick O'Teen. He's
Yeah.
yeah, you should talk to him about this sometime, because I had a great conversation with him one time talking about the Canadian political party and sort of trying to move ideas within it, and how like basically just impossible it is, because you either are the head of the party, in which case your ideas are in, or you're not, and the head of the party will quite literally kick you out. I think Americans often take for granted how open our political processes are for like choosing leadership within the party. In Canada, you have to be a dues-paying, card-carrying member of the party to vote for who the party leader is, and it cultivates a certain kind of politics that's not at all open. That's much more reminiscent of the DNC before the DNC riots in Chicago in 1964. I want to say was the year LBJ ran for re-election.
Yeah, that was. Gosh, now I'm trying to connect this back to like one of the first things we talked about today, which was the idea that any in group that has like a slightly cultish mentality of like a us versus them type of thing is going to have an issue where in order to properly like signal their in-group membership, they almost have to be like more hostile to outsiders. And I would think if you've got a group that's run in such a way where anybody who's dissident from the party just gets kicked out of it, it seems like just ripe for that kind of problem.
I think what's really interesting is that it seems to be doing the exact opposite, because I think the biggest gripe that a lot of conservatives have with their own party in Canada is that it's often too conciliatory, particularly with Aaron O'Toole, who who was the party leader, but then got kicked out recently because he lost the election. But in the most recent Canadian election, that was last late summer, fall. He was very like conciliatory. Like he was for abortion, he was for gun restriction, he was for a carbon tax, all these big budget issues that most conservatives don't. As a because essentially, I think the feeling among sort of run of the mill conservatives is that the elites don't think that conservative ideas are good enough to. There aren't enough conservatives to win off those ideas, so they're selling us out. They're ignoring what we, the real conservatives, want to try and get the more moderate votes. It's almost the opposite effect, where because they are unrestrained by the public opinion of their actual voters, they get to pursue a more conciliatory agenda. They get to ignore the more firebrands and people who really want the strong issues.
That's kind of an interesting reversal of what happens in the U.S., where it seems like the mainstream Democrats, are like constantly accused of being too conciliatory toward the other side. And I know that there is some of that happens with the Republicans, right, where the hardcore evangelicals often feel
Hmm.
that the mainstream conservatives
John
are
McCain and Mitt Romney, these kind of types have been all getting attacked for being rhinos for decades.
they all get attacked for being rhinos. Our friend, somebody online identifies as a rhino, by the way. But um,
Based. Hey, we need some more. Hey, somebody online as a dino across the aisle. Okay,
yeah,
we need to have some. We need to have some alliance. We got to look out for each other.
yeah, if I ever be a VTuber, maybe I'll be a dinosaur.
Yeah, that would be a good one. Dino versus Rhino debate.
Oh yeah. That's true. We got somebody can be like the Rhino VTuber versus the Dino VTuber. Yeah.
Yeah, Joe Manchin versus John McCain death battle.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That's what we need. Yeah, I think it's tough, but man, it, I think what it mostly speaks to is the fact that people are kind of losing their minds a little bit in these last 5 years, and the whatever levers are most accessible to like the general public are being most affected by this. Where you have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who talked about how like the Rothschilds solar energy collectors in space beamed that energy down and started the California wildfires. And you just look at Trump, right? How the sort of the elite of the Republican Party was really powerless to stop the people wanting to put this crazy motherfucker in charge of the party, and are sort of having to bide their time and see, how much of this party can we salvage and take back. Someone like Mitch McConnell, I think, is like, as much as Mitch McConnell gets hate on the left, Mitch McConnell is our best hope. Mitch McConnell is our Obi-Wan to try and make sure that the Republican Party does not become the party of Trump, I think, in the coming decades.
Yeah, because he, as far as I can tell, is like not actually seriously committed to to any of the
Yeah, yeah. I
principal
mean,
beliefs of
Mitch,
his party.
yeah,
I mean,
Mitch is just a raw politics power player. And I think, he does, what beliefs he does have are definitely much more of the traditional, almost Rockefeller Republican-esque, neoconservative George Bush, George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan type, not at all the new populist. And he's just sort of having to go along. It's like that famous Lindsey Graham quote, where he has that people use to, throw in Lindsey Graham's face now that he's like a Trump, sycophant, which he kind of has to be because of Trump polls so well in the Republican Party. But there's some quote Lindsey Graham has says, if we nominate Trump, we'll lose and we'll deserve to lose. And I think there's this real attitude of like the old guard of the Republicans of like thinking, God damn it, why are our voters so crazy? Like that they really have tied our hands. Every reasonable Republican has to do the Liz Cheney routine, where they either stand up for what they believe in and get murked because of it, or they look at the Trump polling numbers and are like, Jesus Christ, I mean, I suppose it's better for me to be in the system pushing for moderation than for me to take a stand and get nothing done and just get, cold.
yeah. Man, I totally forgot where we were at in this
There's a
video.
myth that a single debate, or video, or article, or any singular piece of media can flip someone's opinion on an issue 180 degrees, because those are the stories that
Oh, it
get
was the
circulated the
three
most.
different, the
But that's
comfort
Yeah.
almost never
convince,
how it
yeah.
happens. Changing your opinion on a single topic, let alone your entire political outlook, takes time. It takes multiple instances of your current beliefs being questioned in a way that sows doubt about your worldview, and there's no one path everyone can take to get there. In an age where you can get your news and opinions from more niche and insular sources that only exist to confirm narrower worldviews, you can curate your sources such that those challenges to your way of thinking never risk penetrating the larger and larger walls you build around them. Unless you tune into a game where your ideas, your strong, virtuous ideas, are put to the test against the opposition, which is easy. Your ideas are better. You have science and morality on your side. Your axioms are more grounded. And why is your guy letting the other guy go on like that? Why isn't he letting him know how wrong he is? No, that study can't be real. He's got to be making that up. Wait, that's not fair. He doesn't understand why we think the thing matters. Speak up, dude. You're letting him get away with it. Debate gets people in the door who wouldn't be there otherwise. You don't have to completely shatter someone's worldview during a debate for it to have an effect on them. Sometimes it's good enough to plant a seed of doubt. Maybe a particular argument they like to use doesn't hold up well under scrutiny. Maybe the strawman version of the other side they've been fed turned out to be off the mark. Maybe the strongman big boy they've idolized wasn't as infallible as they thought. Just like a sports fan might put some personal investment into how their team does, so too does a debate watcher.
I think this is actually like way more of a thing that I value in debate, rather than the idea that you're just going to get somebody to like do a complete 180. I think just
Mhm.
the idea of getting people to like moderate their opinions, or just be like
Yeah.
less overconfident is a much more plausible outcome, and maybe even a better outcome than just getting them to be a hardcore on your own supporter of your
Yeah.
own
It's
side.
almost if someone 180s that quickly, you almost have to be like, okay, wait a minute. Did you never even believe in these ideas that strongly? And now you're also just believing in my ideas for equally, not good reasons. How valuable, if all it took for me to get you over to my side was this, is that all it's going to take someone else to get you away from these ideas? And you almost want to, it's the classic thing, teaching someone to fish versus giving them a fish. You almost want to be like, okay, no, let me show you why you should believe in, black people not being inferior, instead of just parroting this opinion, because like, I don't want to leave you with this and then come back in 3 months and see that you actually are now believing that the earth is flat, because you're just very easy to convince.
Or I don't want you to become one of the crazies on our side that we have to disavow.
Yeah, that's the big one. Yeah. It's like the legion of people who are like, yeah, I almost fell down the alt-right rabbit hole, the problems of socialization, and just wanting this in-group, a place to feel at home. And that's why I'm a Stalinist now, and the streets must run. And it's like, dude, I'm begging you to like realize like how comedic this is. Comedic and sad, to be honest. But like, it's just so obvious that the exact same flaws that allowed you to go down one rabbit hole are just sending you down another one.
Yeah, so hopefully I'm not saying anything that you wouldn't want to share publicly,
No,
but
go
you've
for it.
told me before that you had some history of like being the guy that almost fell down the alt-right rabbit hole, right?
Yeah.
But you didn't end up flipping and becoming a Stalinist, right? So
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
what do you think it was about if you're willing to share about your particular case that
I think yeah, I'm perfectly willing to share. Thank you for asking. I think that a big part of it was the fact that I disconnected from this kind of like online politics space. I think that there was time for me to go through self-reflection and moderation in who I am as a person, because I think a lot of these ideas are transmitted not along political lines, but along social and cultural lines. I think it is very telling that for example, there's this long running, sort of like meme that's like, what is the deal with all the trans Nazis? And what it's referring to is the fact that, and there is some truth to it where, man, when I was in these spaces, and still when I sometimes visit them, there are a lot of people that are trans, but are also like talking about like how Jews control the world. And it's like, man, you would think that these would not be very similar. And I think what it speaks to is that these rabbit holes really prey on people who are vulnerable. It's very similar to how ISIS recruitment videos will talk about, do you feel like your life doesn't have purpose? Do you want to be part of something bigger than yourself? And I think that trans people having to go through all the stuff that trans people have to go through are particularly vulnerable to those kinds of arguments. And that's why you sometimes see them getting pulled down these rabbit holes. And I think it's because I was able to disconnect from that social space and sort of, go touch grass quite literally, that when I came back I was a lot more resistant to like someone saying like, and this is why Stalin was like, I'm like, okay, wait a minute, hold on a second, I'm starting to see some parallels here. And I think I think that was a big part of why I was able to, that I had time to disconnect and actually reflect. Whereas it feels like a lot of other people, not to say that, I'm better than these people or anything, but I think that many people who have that phenomenon of falling down one rabbit hole and then falling down one that's, polar, that is a polar opposite, politically speaking, are really just going through the same, new boss, same as the old boss, where, they are just looking for an enemy to blame a lot of these problems. And a lot of these ideas are actually a lot more similar than people want to give them credit for. When you're, I don't know if you've ever seen the video, race, best friends, racist and woke person. And it's sort of talking about, it's these two guys. One's wearing a shirt that says racist on it, and one person's wearing a shirt that says like woke person. And the woke person's like, I think that white people are responsible for all the evil in the world and are running the secret cabal. And then the racist is like, and if I can get you to know that to a very specific kind of white person who wear a certain kind of hat, then I think we can agree on a lot of things. And it's like, I think a lot of the sort of logical fallacies of like the and when you get into certain, when you get like the dissident right and popular spaces, this is a real issue to them. The idea of, is the left the real enemy or are the elites the real enemy? Like a show like, I don't know if you are aware of The Rising with Crystal Ball and I'm not gonna remember the other guy's name. It was this show on the Hill, and they do their own show now where it's basically this very populist left and populist right person, and they're very much in the attitude that like the problem isn't left versus right, it's the elites versus the people. Whereas other people like Nick Fuentes very much embrace that kind of populism, but are still very much distinct. Oh yes, no, it is the people of the right versus the elites of the left. And so even in populist spaces, there's this real acknowledgement that there's a lot of similarities between these two rabbit holes and disagreement over whether or not they meet at the bottom. If they, shall we say, start very different and curve together in a circular, almost, forming some sort of shape that you might be useful to put on a hoof of a horse to help them walk.
Oh, that one thing you showed that one time was so funny. You were on a panel and you showed that like McDonald's graph. Do you know what I'm talking
Oh, the
about?
goal. Yeah, I am. Hold on. Like, Yeah, I am very aware of the Golden Arches theory. That is one of my favorites. Hold on, let me just see if we can. Let's see. Here we go. R/neoliberal, so you know it's good. This is the rule to live life by, folks.
I wouldn't recommend you put it on your horse, but no,
Hmm.
nevertheless, it's
Yeah, maybe not the best tool for climbing up the Rockies, but a great tool for online discourse.
yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think honestly speaking, I think that's probably the biggest thing, biggest asset to of me avoiding falling back in that same rabbit hole is I was able to disconnect. And when I was reintroduced into the space, of course, the advocates in the middle are also huge parts. People like Destiny or Bastiat or anyone who's fighting the good fight of trying to moderate our political discussions, not to undermine your contributions because those are important. But I think a big part of it was just I had matured as a person and I had taken some time to think and live some life, frankly. And I think that's a really big part of this equation.
Yeah. So when you brought up the point about ISIS earlier, I remember it was kind of a lot of people used to think maybe like 20 years ago that terrorist groups would be comprised of mostly like poor underprivileged people who are trying
Hmm.
to like fight against the oppression that their people are
Economic
facing.
anxiety.
Yeah, but of course, like if you look at the 9/11 attackers, it's like doctors and engineers and shit. And
Hmm.
but I think the explanation is the one that I believe most is the one that basically you gave, which is that it's about that they found like community and values and it's really their kind of alienation that makes them susceptible to that
Hmm.
and not some kind of like material conditions of oppression.
Yeah, I think there's this pitfall that I think a lot of people on the more like Marxist or socialist left, or very much like the high theory left, makes the mistake that they make, which is they say that the reason why Republicans disagree with us, or believe these things, is economic anxiety. If we could alleviate the economic anxiety of the lower classes, then they couldn't be weaponized and to serve bigotry or things like these. And I think that just really is just not true and ignores some real important social divides that are a lot more difficult to reconcile with. It
Yeah,
almost reminds me.
that's not to say there's no truth to it. I mean, it's not the whole argument about material conditions. It's not nothing, but yeah, I
Yeah,
mostly agree with you.
yeah, yeah. I don't know if you've ever seen the comic of it's some elephant with like a clipboard writing down. And the elephant has a speech bubble that says, "All right, I understand you disagree with my policy. Would I be willing to get you on board if I decrease the spending by 32%?" And then it's a picture of like, I think it's like there's a picture of some MAGA type, and I think specifically it's the picture of the buffalo guy from J6. And he has a speech bubble saying, "I literally believe that you eat babies." And then the rhino says, "Okay, so 40%?" And it just sort of underscores the idea that like on a certain level, this sort of like bland economic compromise can't reconcile increasing massive social rifts.
Yeah. So do you think that those rifts just can't be reconciled at all, or do you think
I mean,
it's
I hope not, because I think that's like really scary if it is. Like, I don't know what the solution is then. Like, I feel like at that, like, I don't think they are. I think our society is very good, and people should be less doomer, and that there's reason to be hopeful for the future. So, but if it were the case that what, we are never going to be able to reach the people who think that like vaccines cause autism, then like I don't know what the future of this country is going to look like. Like some really scary scenarios, I think, start to become possible in that situation.
yeah, but the thing
I mean, a
is
house
like
divided cannot stand. Not to
yeah,
engage in quote brain.
but to go back to the thing earlier about the like gay marriage opinions flipping really quickly, it does make me think that people will just kind of go with the flow in a lot of
Hmm.
cases if they perceive society to be moving in a certain way, and then people who really stick to their guns are gonna be left on the fringe. Now, I don't know if that'll ever happen with anti-vaxxers abandoning their position en masse, but it probably
Yeah.
won't, or like QAnon people or whoever it is.
I think the
But
election is the big one because you actually are starting to see. It's funny. There was some debate that someone had with a right leaning person, and they said, "Okay, you can't be telling me that vaccine, anti-science of a vaccine is equal on the left and the right." And this Republican person was like, "Well, actually, at this point, Republicans are pretty vaccinated." He pointed to some data that was like, at this point, a lot of Republicans have like thrown up their hands and sort of sheepishly been like, "Okay, I'll get the shot." Um, uh, as sort of a defense of the idea that guys, they're not crazy. So I think there actually is a lot of hope on that kind of movement. I think the election and just like more conspiracy theory stuff about like political things is one where it's really hard to move people. Because with the vaccine at a certain level, it's like, all right, your brother died of COVID. Would you like the vaccine now? And it's like, okay, yeah. Whereas, the because what that is a very important event is happening in your personal life that shakes your faith in something, right? A very meaningful personal moment. And with the vaccine, unfortunately, that might have to be like a close call, or maybe a call that wasn't close where you did unfortunately lose a loved one, which is tragic. That should never have to happen. But at least it can happen. I don't know like what event would need to what analog there is for that for like the election. Like I feel like the analog would have to be them being like, yes, Trump was robbed, let's put Trump in power, and then Trump gets put in power and just basically ruins the country. And then they're like, "Oh, we shouldn't have done this." And it's like, "Well, it's a little late now, dude."
yeah, I don't even. I mean, I don't think that can be the answer for a couple of reasons, though. Because one of which is that that's too high a price to pay to convince people
Yeah,
when
exactly.
when the whole point of convincing them is to avoid that exact outcome. Like I
Yeah,
don't
well,
think giving them
well,
what they want
I think
is.
what I'm yeah, I think what I'm worried about is the idea that these people are so entrenched that the only way you can convince them is for them to see the consequences of their wrong opinion. And with vaccines, that is tragically the death of a person, which I wish it wasn't. But at least that can happen, and then we can move on. If the way that we have to show them their ideas are wrong in the case of election is letting them see the consequences of pursuing these bad ideas and like putting Trump in power and like he like starts like undermining our institutions, like that is not necessarily recoverable in the way that some deaths from COVID are.
I wonder if there's a different way that you could show them like the consequences of their bad actions, though, right? Because like, or
God, I
their
hope so.
beliefs. So, like, for example, they're trusting in media sources that are spreading conspiracies, right? And so what if those media sources were to get something like super wrong in a way
Hmm.
that's just easily demonstrated to them?
Yeah, that's true. I think flashpoints in like big occurrences are hugely important for turning public opinion. Whether it's like like George Floyd, obviously was a huge moment for BLM that the left then squandered immediately. But theoretically, if it hadn't been as squandered, we could have made more progress. Or I'm trying to think like the death of Emmett Till, way back in the day was a huge moment that where it was like, man, Jesus, people, like wake up, stuff like this. So yeah, there undoubtedly are other ways. I still am very positive, but I would say, out of all of my concerns for the world, I think the ability to sort of stop people from losing their minds, I think, is probably one of the ones that I am most concerned about. It's right up there with my big three, which are climate change, China, and people losing their minds on the internet.
I sort of feel like almost every behavioral problem with humanity is reducible to the fact that we have like Stone Age brains living in a
Yep,
world that's that
100%.
with like technology that makes our environment so different from the one that our ancestors were adapted to, but our brains just haven't caught up.
Yep, we're just not designed for any of this stuff. And it's like you give a chimpanzee an AK-47 and like there's probably going to be some mistakes made and we are giving ourselves who are far more analogous to monkeys than most people would like to admit, things that are way crazier than an AK-47.
Yeah. No, I mean, when you said to give a chimp an AK-47, I mean, that's the first thing I thought of was like, well,
Yep.
we're like almost literally doing that.
Yes. Yeah.
Tested by proxy through someone else. And if those arguments fail to get that satisfying W once, 3 times, 10 times, maybe they stop thinking of them as strong arguments. Debate means losing control of the framing you get to create when the other guy isn't in the room. Oh, you can try. You can proselytize to the audience about what your opponent really believes, but now they're here. Now they at least have the chance to fight back. Now your audience has to listen to them speak their own opinions and push back against
Yep.
yours in a way you may never have allowed. Nobody wants to suffer through a book or article or video by someone they know is full of shit because they're on the wrong side. But they might show up to a game to get the satisfaction of seeing their side trample the other directly and risk the deflation and anger that comes with realizing that your side is losing. So is debate risky in that it potentially legitimizes harmful positions? Maybe. What's far riskier?
Yes, you should not say maybe here. You should say yes, because you think that's the thing you have to own up to. Where you know I know it's overdone, but like you don't want to have the performance that the Surfs did against Lord and Southern on like residential graves, for example,
I've
where
still
you
never
just
seen that, but yeah,
I've
I've
seen
heard.
parts of it, but yeah, it's not good. Um, and yeah, it's really thing. I think this is the thing that a lot of Destiny fans are sort of grasping at when they feel uncomfortable with his sometimes engagement with Nick Fuentes, where it is almost this thing of both Destiny and Nick are thinking to each other, I need to sort of ingratiate myself to their audience to pull people over more than the other. They're almost playing this, they're almost gambling with, Destiny's gambling, how many Nazis can I de-radicalize today? And Nick's is gambling, how many people can I radicalize into Nazis these days? And that is, man, that's a hell of a gamble to take.
It is, and I think like it would if he were talking to a Nazi that didn't already have a big audience of his own. then I would think that gamble would be like pretty clearly not worth it. Now, I happen to, of course, Destiny seems to be willing to talk to just about anybody, regardless of
I
that
think
that calculation. But
I think yes and no, because I think that when it's a much smaller person, they're just not going to have the kind of draw that someone like Nick Fuentes would have. When
well, it's a
I-
gamble, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, that is definitely a gamble.
Because
I'm
Nick
not really
Fuentes
sure.
at one time didn't have the big audience
Yeah,
that he
yeah.
has
I mean,
now,
yeah, that's
right?
the obvious question, huh? I'm not really sure why, but I just have this sense that Nick is when you talk to someone like Nick Fuentes versus if you just talk to some random, nobody, that there would be a much lower risk, and I'm trying to think of why that is. I think there's a unique dynamic going on with Destiny and Nick Fuentes, not necessarily unique to just them, but very distinct from the typical dynamic, and that is almost a kind of like more like joking, jovial attitude. That to be fair, this isn't always the case. Like, for example, his debate with Nick Fuentes over Russia was one where Destiny was like, batten down the hatches, like, we're going to war here. But, like, I think that, like, if you looked at, like, for example, like, the way he engages with him on, like, for example, like, the kill stream. There was I think it was when Destiny went live to the kill stream. He was still living in California at the time. That kind of attitude is one where it's not really about logically proving out. It's kind of like making fun of Nick in a way where it's like where Nick's own audience starts to laugh at him and feel the pull to Destiny a little bit, and Nick is simultaneously trying to do that. They're both trying to appear like the cooler version of each other. It is almost like a kind of like male friend group where there's like this friendly jockeying that like is kind of friendly, but under the surface it's kind of like, okay, motherfucker, like I'm gonna like be the it is almost like the cringe like alpha male type shit where you're trying to like really like assert yourself as like the person who is better and cooler than the other guy, and should be admired and looked after.
I haven't actually seen the content that you're describing, but I recognize the social dynamic that you're
Hmm.
talking about. Yeah.
Is the idea that what positions get to be legitimate is up to us. The go-to rebuttal here is, oh, so you think Nazis deserve a platform to spread their ideas? And my answer is usually no. So maybe this is the American in me. I am married after all. But I genuinely value freedom of speech. I think that there should be no state-imposed
Cancel.
penalty for any speech short of direct threats of violence. Where this gets complicated is the very large spectrum that constitutes indirect threats of violence, or things that may lead to violence, or things that may start someone on the path to begin believing that violence could
Literally
be considered
anything.
as an option at some point in the future.
Yeah.
This is why, flawed as it may be, I think it's good that media platforms can enforce their own terms of service to keep hate speech and other stochastic terrorism at least somewhat limited without getting the state involved in policing speech. So yes, ban the Nazis because they serve only to deteriorate speech, and we as a society have moved past the need to hear out their ideas anymore. Some people have taken this position and, since they find any conflict whatsoever to be intolerable, want to apply it to all positions that differ too far
Yep.
from their own. And as your tolerance for conflict atrophies from disuse, too far gets a lot closer, and everything beyond that line starts to blur more and more, until actual Nazis start to look like the average 53-year-old dad from Indiana. Here's a test. Marriage is between a man and a woman, and no man-made contract can say otherwise. There are only two genders, and you can't change the one you were born with. Systemic racism is in the past. Any problems faced by black people today are due to poor personal choices. All of these positions are wrong and ought to be changed within the people who hold them. But none of them make someone a Nazi. None of them are violent, and none of them should be banned on public platforms. Just
And
because
all
the
of them are
Nazis, the
mainstream,
Taliban, and
or
Karen the real estate
I mean,
agent all rejected
they may
gay
not be
marriage.
majority opinions, but all of those can be found in relatively mainstream people.
I think the bullet you have to bite. I think the not necessarily the bullet you have to bite. I think you could make a really strong argument that's like, look, dude, if I put like, JF in a line with like nine like typical like boomer conservatives, like you're gonna be able to tell which of these is like a crazy schizo. Like nine of them are gonna be saying, I'm for legal immigration, they just gotta come through the right way. And then one of them is gonna be saying, and that is why, the black people, they are just genetically inferior. Like you're gonna be able to distinguish like the truly reprehensible opinions from mainstream conservative ones. I think the more difficult bullet to bite, though, when you really run that logic down as to, well, why is that the case, is that you just have to take take people where they are in our society. It is amazing that we live in a society where thankfully there really are no crazy, super out there mainstream opinions on the level of like, the Jewish question. But if it really
Oh
was the
man,
case,
QAnon though, and
I mean,
anti-vaxxers.
we're getting there, okay? I mean, it's not over till the bell rings. But I guess the analogy I would provide is like compared to like if you looked at like America back in like the 50s or like Germany in like the 30s or 40s, where at that point you almost would have to be like, no, dude, you can't be deplatforming people that like hate Jews when we live in Germany in the 1930s because like if you do that, like I'm sorry, we're just not going to be able to convince these people any other way. Like you just have to take people where they are. It's nice that we get to take them at a point that's not that bad compared to human history, but if we really were at that point, then I think the position I would have to endorse is like, yeah, I think I would be advocating for us, not deplatforming these crazies if they get to a point where, because what is and isn't crazy, I think is ultimately just a question of like statistics of like where the society is at.
Yeah. So as far as something like QAnon, I mean, there must be a way to engage them in like I'm going to say debate, but I intend to construe that word broadly. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be like debate the way that we think of it on Twitch, but I think that there's you know there has to be some form of confrontational public discourse by which
Yeah.
you can dispel the QAnon type beliefs,
Hmm.
because they're not going to go away by just ignoring them. But it's
Yep.
just it's very hard to say like I don't know what's exactly the right way to do it, and then if you don't know the right way to do it, then is it worth the risk of platforming them to
Yeah, you can only put so many people on Prisoner Island, and I think there's this tendency on the left to want to put everyone on Prisoner Island, and what happens is you become the island because you have moved so many people over to Prisoner Island that actually that is the society which will be dictating things to you, not the other way around.
yeah.
Does not mean that they are the same level of threat. But watch the response this gets if it gets clipped. I'm downplaying bigotry. I'm ignoring how hate crimes come about. And if the mood strikes, I'm directly killing marginalized people by saying those statements up there should not be banned. No, instead, we can get those people to listen to us and actually get them to change their minds. But this kind of catastrophizing, this knee-jerk response to go for the nuclear interpretation, is basically all you have left if you've gotten so used to avoiding conflict that you reject it altogether. There can be no debate because debate is conflict and all conflict is dangerous. And I think that brings me to my last point. A little bravado is not a bad thing. This notion that we can't debate X topic or X group or X person because they're dangerous, because that allows their ideas to spread, because they gain access to our audience by bringing them on, I get it. Seriously, I do. But, like, have you ever watched a show or video on Nazi military strategy or something, and the speaker was like, yeah, we were lucky the Nazis lost because their leaders were military geniuses and their scientists were brilliant and their equipment was years ahead of its time. Kind of making it seem like they were superior in every way, and it sure is a good thing that we lucked out and beat them because these titans of men just so happened to be evil. Well, it turns out that was shockingly propaganda from idiots who wanted everyone else to think that they were stronger than they were. There's a reason they needed such a massive censorship campaign. The Nazi myths could not stand up to any degree of scrutiny because they were ridiculous. By painting the pasty groypers and discount Steven Seagals as too dangerous and powerful to risk influencing the populace, you're kind of doing their PR work for them. And it's not like you've denied them an avenue to spread their ideas, you've just guaranteed that they're choosing safer options for themselves because risk goes both ways.
To
I
some
think that's
degree, that's true. I mean, we do have some power to reduce the
yeah.
avenue by which their ideas spread, but I mostly agree with what he's saying.
I think there's also this tendency to it's not something that people are explicitly saying, but almost like a unintended conclusion, which is that you kind of legitimize how the truth is like on our side. Right? Something I would always used to say is like, man, you should not be implying that like, maybe there are some good points that racists should be making. Truth is on the side on our side, right? It is the truth that showed us that like race realism isn't real, or the idea that like the Red Scare was a bad idea, or that gay people aren't horrible monsters. And when you sort of are implying that like, oh man, the right might be doing really good in the debate space, even though you don't mean it, right? I'm sure they would say, oh, I'm just saying that people can be taken for fools. What it kind of reads as to people, because no one thinks of themselves as a fool, what it kind of reads to people is like, oh man, they have some really good points. You're almost like, right? It's almost like you're showing up to the debate and you're saying, "Oh, I'm not going to engage with you." If this was a competition debate, that's a concession. That's going to be a win on the judges' flow, and they're going to get to advance to the next round.
I think it can definitely come across that way. But I think it just actually is true that we're all a bunch of fools who can be
Yeah.
fooled by bad arguments. Like literally everyone can be fooled by bad arguments. But I get what you mean. It definitely looks like if you express some apprehension at having to deal with some particular argument, it appears as if you're
Yeah.
crediting it with being a good argument.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you ever sat down and watched or read right-wing content? 95% of it is reacting to something a left-leaning person said and catastrophizing the hell out of it to stoke that profitable fear in their audience. They are already using us for content. Refusing live debate makes sure they exclusively get to do it on their own terms, where they get to frame everything we believe without us there to correct it. Election fraud, critical race theory, the Antifa horde, that shit spread like wildfire
the
without us
debate
ever
happens
letting them
with
take
or
over our
without your
spaces to spread it to our
participation.
audiences. Why would you be categorically against a platform where we can call them on their bullshit in real time? We can invade their spaces and reach their audiences. We can use our own rhetoric to make our ideas more appealing than theirs. And this can be easy because our ideas are better than theirs. We have evidence and data and rational connections between positions that lead to a better world. All of that rhetoric is built on a much more stable foundation, so why would we not use every tool in the arsenal to change things for the better? What is this notion that our audiences are vulnerable rubes just ripe for the taking, waiting for a charismatic demagogue to whisper to them that all of their problems can be blamed on the
But they
brown
kind of
people?
are,
What is
though.
it?
Yeah, it's like if you cut out the brown people there, it's like, why would you think that our left wing audiences would be susceptible to the idea that they can blame all of their problems on what? Oh, wait a minute, that's actually something that happens all the time.
And he pointed it out earlier in this same video.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is the really difficult sort of Chinese knot to get through, which is the idea that or Chinese finger trap, which is the idea that on the one hand, our audiences are gullible, so ideas can be convincing them, but simultaneously, if you say, no one thinks of themselves as the idiot, so if you look at people and say you could be fooled by this, well, they're thinking, well, I wouldn't be fooled. So what you're saying is they actually might be right. I would be convinced, and if I'm being convinced, of course, it's because it's correct. So yeah, it's a really hard thing to sort. I don't know if you've ever had someone tell you that these two quotes that one of my English teachers told me once, which was great. And the teacher said these are contradictory, but they're both true. And that is that you owe it to yourself to go read the classics of literature to see what the hubbub is about. See why is it that people are still talking about Shakespeare, all these years later. But also, if you're going to do this, it has to be for yourself. You can't be doing it because someone said you have to. You have to have that real passion. And I think it's just the case that, there's some great wisdom in both of those, but it's kind of a difficult thing to sort out because there is some real contradiction there.
I'm trying to figure out how do you intend that to analogize to what Jangles is saying?
Well, I think it has to be the simultaneous truth that, yes, our audiences can be fooled by these people, but they are wrong. I think it's a lot easier to square this circle because what you just have to admit is be like, yeah, everyone is capable of being convinced by a charlatan. The smartest human being capable would fall for Ben Shapiro owns feminist compilations if they grew up in the right conditions.
Oh, okay. So the thing you were saying about your English teacher, I think I was taking the analogy a little too far in my own head and trying to make it work beyond the level of just here's a seemingly paradoxical set of
Yeah,
arguments.
that's all.
Okay.
This perception of their audiences as either stoic ideologues unswayable by whatever meek opposition we can muster, or feckless goons unreachable by human reason. When someone says that debate only benefits the right, what I hear is that they're just better than us at everything. They have the better tools and the brilliant rhetoricians, and we just have to find some way of getting people to realize we're right without having to talk to them. That's defeatist bullshit. Why would you admit that a skill you can learn, debate, is forever in their favor when it isn't? I advocate for debate because I think we are right, and that we are smart and empathetic and forward-thinking and charismatic and adaptable and hot. I advocate for debate because I think we can win, even when our opponents show up. Conclusion. If you started this video as
There is something he's sort of getting at there. He doesn't quite explicitly say it, and that is that I think you need I don't want to say Steven Crowders because you don't need to go to that level, but you need like these like avatars that are just going to be you do need your own version of like Venezuela iPhone 5 million. Like I think you do need certain figures in part of the cultural movement to just be these like people who are like, yeah, I'm a liberal and that's fucking awesome and that's badass and you guys are a bunch of losers and I'm laughing at you and stuff like this. Like I think you do need you need some figures that are like emphatic cultural defenses of your ideology that are cool and people are envious of them. I think you do need that.
Yeah, totally. What's the Venezuela reference? I didn't understand that.
There's this meme basically there is this meme by left-leaning people that is like a sort of caricature of a right-wing argument, which is like, oh, you believe in socialism? What about Venezuela iPhone 5 million? And it's the idea is that it is this very glib, non-responsive argument. And what it's referencing is the idea that, oh, I think we should expand Obamacare. What about Venezuela? It's like, okay, dude, that isn't really a very good argument. Or like, oh, I think that democratic socialism would be a good idea. Yet you use an iPhone. Curious, right? Or like, oh, I think that I'm a socialist. Oh, what about the 5 million people that died in the gulags under Stalin? There are these three arguments that are some of the most like straw man like Republican arguments against them that are very weak. And the idea is putting them all together, you're making this caricature of someone who, when they hear like a buzzword like Bernie Sanders or minimum wage, they just rattle off a bunch of like totally irrelevant bullshit.
Okay, and then the relevance of bringing that up was you're saying that people actually do need to have these kind of like dumb arguments on their own side.
Yeah, I think we do need like I think we do need a kind of like class of like smugness and like cultural like superiority where like because when more older conservative people make those arguments they will when they do it. I think it's mostly a straw man, but some people do make these arguments. They'll do it in sort of like a very superior like, oh, you silly little goose type thing where it's like, I think we need a better minimum wage. Oh, well, nice iPhone you have. Ha 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 ha. You'll go. It's part of the idea of
So
like,
you
oh, it's just
yeah,
a
you believe in
phase.
workers' rights, but your clothes were made by Southeast Asian slave labor or something like.
Yeah, things like this that I think you need like a certain level of like cultural like assertiveness, like avatars to defend it. It actually reminds me of this article I once read by Milo Yiannopoulos because I was a big Milo guy when I was falling down my alt-right rabbit hole. And it was a really good article in a certain, I mean, I disagree with it now, obviously. But the point that Milo made is that he was speaking, from a right-wing perspective to right-wingers. And he was saying, hey, if we want to defeat Islam, or something like this, we need to engage with it how we engage with communism during the Cold War, which is not just on like material grounds, but on cultural grounds. Part of the reason we were able to defeat communism is because capitalism was cool. We had blue jeans and rock and roll and things like this. And people thought that like communism was like lame and not cool, right? And you need to be like, yeah, we're awesome. Look at us. Don't you want to be like us? We're badass. Like, suck on it, loser. And I obviously don't think that that should be the kind of thing that's waged against like the religion of Islam, but I think the idea that the concept that, hey, if you're waging two ideologies against each other, a big part of your strategy should be making it cool to be you, and having this really emphatic defense. I think like populists and like schizos, frankly, on both the left and the right, get away with like characterizing like our current world as being lame or being dreary, and as like more of like a centrist liberal, really like as a neoliberal type myself, I very much want to see more people going out there like fucking Bill Clinton playing the saxophone being like, yeah, we cut world poverty in half over the last 30 years, we're fucking awesome. Stuff like this, like the invention of the internet and like the democratization of access to information is badass, like this kind of attitude. And I think that's what sort of Jangles is getting at when he says, I want to think that we're awesome, we're smart, we have logic and empathy on our side, we're sexy. He even says that in there, we're sexy. He's clearly getting at this idea that he wants to cultivate an image of his side as being awesome. And I think that is really something that is correct and needs to be done more of.
Yeah. So as you were saying that, it reminded me of when we did the rhetoric panel, like I went in there. My take was on the like classical schema of the like ethos, logos, pathos thing, and that this is all ethos stuff that you're describing,
Yeah.
and so to bring back a little bit of what my take was there, it was that logos is optional, the other two are mandatory. So so the kind of appeals that you're describing to people's identity, I think, are actually really important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think neoliberals and just centrist non-schizos of the world unite need to much more offensively be characterizing like, I don't know why you're so mad that like we destroyed you guys. Like I think you need to much more be like like have a happy-go-lucky attitude, and people point it out, be like, of course I'm happy. We won. We've run the world for the past 40 years. You're just you guys run the discords, we run the countries. I'm fine with that division of labor, and really start to kind of get at people in that way.
Yeah, that's true. Although I hope that in the course of doing that, we can moderate our own opinions enough to recognize that there are significant
Yeah.
problems with the current world order that we
That's the
should.
danger. Yeah, that's the danger. Is it's sort of a can of it's almost like getting rid of the filibuster, or like starting to violate some of the norms of the Senate, where when one side does it, you kind of have to start doing it, or you're gonna lose ground. But you start risk losing yourself and getting lost in the sauce.
Yeah, I think it's hard to be like have this whole like smug attitude, like we won. Oh, and but at the expense of 40 different coups that happened around the world,
Yeah.
and I'll,
If It's you know what it's actually like? It's like propaganda. It's like if you are the allies, do you like, okay, clearly we are not the Nazis and we want to beat the Nazis, so propaganda is a really effective tool. But do we risk cutting the legs out from underneath ourselves and start believing in things that aren't correct? What if by using propaganda we lose sight of the truth, we eventually start believing wrong things, and we start to move towards ideas that are similarly dangerous to the Nazis, or maybe not even similarly dangerous, but just worse than what we already are. That's the real danger. It actually reminds me. Are you aware of NATO wave?
no.
Okay, well, this is actually a good tangent to go down on, especially since we're almost done with this video. There is this. So, I am decently well versed in like. Well, actually, that sounds cringe. I have experience seeing sort of like propaganda-y type videos put together by like online schizos, and a lot of times these videos would take like a very cyberpunk aesthetic. I remember there was a particular video. Let me see if I can actually find it, called "With Gates Wide Open." That was about like European migration. Let me see if I can find it. Gates Wide Open.
Oh, you've
That'd
told
be
me about
pretty.
this video before.
Yeah, I don't think I'm able to find.
I remember you were talking about how it had some like emotionally manipulative synthwave soundtrack or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. Yeah, it was like basically imagine like some videos like some crazy like synth wave that has like some almost like violent that like feelings to it, like really like hard shit. And then it's just videos of like just like huge groups of like migrants who are all black, like walking past like a fence that's torn down. Like this is clearly trying to evoke a certain kind of emotionality. And that was like really dangerous because like it was like something that like helped radicalize me. And there is this subreddit. Let me see if I can find it. Let me just do Reddit NATO Wave. There is this subreddit called NATO Wave, which for me, I feel very conflicted on, because this comes right up to the line of, okay, should we be engaging in this kind of propaganda for our own side, or do we risk losing ourselves? Let me just go to top of all times. But I think you can already sort of start to get the vibe from a lot of these videos. Let's
Yeah.
see.
I mean, right as soon as you bring it up. Well, I mean, I already knew what to expect
And yeah,
based on
so
what
yeah,
you
it's
told me,
like this
but
is a great example where it's like, okay, wait a minute. I feel like this is going too far, because Russian propaganda says that we're Nazis. Like,
right,
wait a minute. Like, it's like at a certain level, I want us to be like, yeah, we're awesome, we're intense, we're badass. But then there's some dude that's like, yeah, and we're gonna blow up cities, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute, hold, I don't know about that. Like, these like this meme, like, oh, okay, this is kind of fun. And or yeah, here, this one. When someone calls me a war criminal for supporting NATO, and this video it just says Cope, and then it just goes over all these pictures of all the presidents we've had, and like Henry Kissinger's in there for a second, and right, and so it's very much like a. And I think this is one of the perfect examples where, for me, this is right on the line where this is exactly the kind of vibe I want to go for. Where it's like, yeah, you're mad, loser, like, shut up. Because I think that's very effective in sort of bolstering the, like, emotion. Like we need to make it cool to be part of, like, the establishment. But then on the other hand, it's like, okay, wait a minute. You like, I don't know if Henry Kissinger should be in there, guys. Like, I don't know. Henry Kissinger is really, out there. I'm a big lover of Obama and Clinton and like Bush Senior. I'll defend those administrations as flawed but still good. I don't think Obama's a war criminal, but like, man, Henry Kissinger might be a war criminal. Like, he did some really bad things.
I mean, this really is walking the line of where, like, are we celebrating imperialism if we embrace this?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, and these yeah, it's like some of these videos get really close, I think, to like almost be like warmongering propaganda, like this one, where like this one's like, this is counter. Oh, people in 2020, OMG, don't start World War II. It's like, or World War III. It's like, okay, I actually do not want World War III to be started. Like, I am fully in support of defending Ukraine and stuff like that, and I'm not one of these people that I think, I understand why you do this, because I think there's some people who are like, we can't start World War III. That's why we have to give Russia everything they want. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, wait a minute. But don't you think you're maybe going a little too far another way? Like, intervention now in Ukraine? Like, I don't know if that's a good idea, dude. Like, this is, I don't know. This is, yeah, yeah. I think you get the vibe at this point, like, of all these different kinds of memes. This is exactly what I'm talking about, where I want stuff like this, but at the same time, I'm very reticent, because when you engage in this level of propaganda, when you advocate for something, you're not God. You don't get to go out and say, okay. It would be like if I started the discussion where Jangles says debate is good when it's done right, and it's like, okay, my advocacy is for us to only do debate in the right way. It's like, okay, that's not going to happen. You don't get to just load into your advocacy that we'll just avoid those mistakes. And so I think the analog here is, if I'm advocating for this kind of attitude, I have to accept that, like, some of these videos are probably going to be getting put out that I disagree with, and that's where I really feel conflicted.
Yeah, there's this unfortunate fact about psychology, which is that people who are perceived to be kind of carefree, overconfident zealots are more likely to be perceived as cool, right? Whereas
Yeah.
people who advocate for more nuance and moderation, it's like, you fucking nerd. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a real balance. Or like this, like, cry more, Serb. It's like, man, I am for the NATO intervention in Yugoslavia and Serbia.
I mean,
Like, I
we're like
definitely think those are
literally
good.
bombing people, though, right? And
Yeah,
it's
but yeah,
like,
like, should you really have this level of like callousness to it? Like, I feel like if this subreddit existed 60 years ago, it'd be like, haha, Japanese people, like a picture of Hiroshima. Like, I bet somewhere on
right.
this Reddit, I bet somewhere on this subreddit, someone has made a meme that is doing that, and they got downvoted into oblivion because people rightly recognize that, like, man, the nuclear bombings, whether or not you think they were justified, that is not something you should be like, haha, making a meme about. We're like, haha, cry Japanese,
Yeah,
right?
and when the intervention in Yugoslavia was there to stop an ethnic genocide, then now you're gonna go cry more Serb in response to that. Like, ugh.
It really is like, I it really is a double-edged sword, I think.
Yeah.
Anyways, but yeah, so that's just the NATO way, and I think that is the thing where when Django says, I want us, I think we're right, we're awesome, we're sexy. He's like, get in. I'm like, yeah, let's do that. But then I think NATO wave demonstrates some of the pitfalls where you go too far with that, and that's the conflict I have internally, trying to sort out whether or not I want more of this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I also feel really conflicted about all the stuff that you just showed me. Yeah.
Categorically against debate in all forms, and you've made it to the end. Thank you for hearing me out. I don't expect that you've been inspired enough to set up a mic and hop into the nearest debate server to duke it out, but I do at least hope that you have a better understanding of why those of us that value debate do so. To recap, a lot of common complaints about debate are by no means unique to debate, and I suspect the deeper reasons are related to how one perceives conflict. Debate does attract a lot of assholes, and we need to stop conflating performative rationality and cruelty as correlates for good ideas. Debate can be incredibly useful for higher order cognitive organization, and it's not cool to tell someone who learns well that way that they're wrong for doing so. At some point, learning is not enough. Debate can be a way to spread ideas to people who might not otherwise listen, and a little bravado is not a bad thing. It's like salt, easy to go overboard, but just the right amount brings out the flavor of everything else. Okay? We good? Yeah, we're good, right? Hey, thanks for making it to the end of this video. You'll see some of the coolest people on the entire internet scrolling by right now, and if you'd like to join them and get the
Right,
esteemed honor of having your
any
name appear
further thoughts
briefly at the end of a
on any
video
of
dozens of people
what
will
we've
watch, you
seen
can
over the
support
last
me
couple
over
weeks
on
in
Patreon.
this?
I have some really exciting
Think
videos
so. I
coming
think he
and I
makes
now have
a lot of
support
good
on Patreon for
points.
the same
I
reason.
think
I really,
it was a pretty
really
good video just in
appreciate
terms
your
of like
support.
he went to, I think he went to the appropriate level of depth for this kind of video. Like it wasn't like an exhaustive, like what we did where we were, where we're pausing and we're like quadrupling the length of this video. I'm very much understanding as to why Jangles wanted this video to be 53 minutes and not 53 hours.
Yeah, I do think it's a little bit interesting the whole idea that if you wanted to prove debate was good, that you're going to do it through like an editorial video essay.
Mhm. Yeah, well, it's a little funny, but I think that the obvious defense would just be debate is good, so can video essays, and of course the people who don't think debate is good aren't exactly going to necessarily have a debate with me on it.
Yeah, I don't think he's wrong to do it that way. It's
Hmm.
just like slightly, I don't know, ironic. But
Yeah, no doubt.
okay, so I think we're just about done for today. Do you wanna
Mhm.
shout yourself out or put in any last
Yeah.
words?
Uh, Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'm Flowtrace. You can check me out at twitch.tv/Flowtrace, twitter.com/Flowtrace_. I'm going to be on the Somebody Online panel in about an hour. So if you want to catch more, you can head on over there. I think somebody was actually in the chat earlier, so you just click on his name, or I think it's just twitch.tv/Somebody Online. But yeah,
Is it the cultural appropriation thing today?
yes, it is.
Nice.
Anyways, yeah, that's all for me.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for hanging out, and see you next week.
We'll do.